الرحمن الرحيم والضحى والليل إذا سجى والضحى والليل إذا سجى ما ودعك ربك وما قلى وللآخرة خير لك من الأولى ولسوف يعطيك ربك فترضى بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والضحى والليل إذا سجى ما ودعك ربك وما قلى والضحى والليل إذا سجى ما ودعك ربك وما قلى وللآخرة خير لك من الأولى ولسوف يعطيك ربك فترضى ولسوف يعطيك ربك فترضى ألم يجدك يتيما فآوى ووجدك ضالا فهدى ألم يجدك يتيما فآوى ووجدك ضالا فهدى ووجدك عائلا فأغنى فأما اليتيم فلا تقهر وأما السائل فلا تنهر وأما بنعمة ربك فحدث وأما بنعمة ربك فحدث صدق الله العظيم أنا من ذكره عز لذاكره فهو الجنة جالسونه الله الله نحن العبيد له في ذكره شرف لنا وفخر وفاخر العبد مولاه سبحان من ذكره عز لذاكره فهو الجالس له الله الله يا خير خلق الله عليك صلى الله يا ابن عبد الله الله عليك صلى الله يا خير خلق الله يا صفوة ربي الله انظر إلى قلبي الله يا صفوة ربي الله انظر إلى قلبي الله يراك بالقرب يا ابن عبد الله.
الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. اللهم علمنا ينفعنا وانفعنا بما زدنا علما إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So welcome everyone, and thank you very much for coming out to address this very important topic, relevant topic. Also thank Brother Awesome for, he mentioned this to me a long time ago actually. This is one of the books by Bouti that he would like to have discussed. And alhamdulillah, I was in Toronto a couple of months ago. No, 3 months ago now. No, two and a bit. And I spoke with the University of Toronto about this topic, about the issues of the youth, and I put Imam Bouti's book into a form of slides. So I want to work through these. I'll try not to do a death by death, but just to bring this summary to you about what we're talking about. So the first thing that comes up obviously is we're talking about this title now, Generation Z. Generation Z is now there's a new title, Generation Alpha. Generation Z is the people who are now at university age, right? People who are around the age of 19, 20, 21. And Imam Bouti, what he raised in his book is, again, his book was written back in the 1970s actually, but he said, I wanted to have a book where I could talk to the youth directly, right? So this book, in a way, is addressed to the youth, that generation, but it's a message that everyone needs to hear. It's a message that everyone needs to hear about how we take care of our young, and how we nurture them, and how we look after them, and how we prepare them for the future. So the first thing we have to break down is also the definition of terms. We talk about, okay, what are the youth, what are the problems? And he starts off with this notion. He says, are the youth actually suffering from a problem? Because what happens is, when people talk about the youth, this is what the main thrust of his book is. He says that we talk about the youth, we say kids these days, or the youth these days, right? We have these expressions we say, right? But then we act as if the youth have passed through some membrane from another dimension, and they just landed here, right? And we don't take into consideration where they actually come from, right? We don't take into consideration that they have parents, they're from Earth, they grew up in this town or in this village or in this city, they went to school here, right? So what we have to say is we have to understand that the youth, because they're young, because they are impressionable, when they're at that age, if you look at that age group, let's say from 15 to 25, or whatever you want to call it, whatever numbers you choose, they are merely the product of what's around them. They're nothing else. They haven't been parachuted into somewhere else. They are the reflection of what, or the manifestation of what they grew up in. Their parents, their teachers, the schools they went to, their peers, media, and so on and so forth. So So that's why Imam Bouti says the truth is that the youth themselves do not have a problem, right? Because the youth, they're not arguing anything, because they can't see what's wrong, right? Young people don't argue with each other about like who's wrong and who's right. No. He says they do not quarrel themselves or their intellects over anything, anywhere at any time, as long as they are intelligent, submit the authority of mankind as natural law. So he says this title, I the problems of the youth, has been a superficial personification of a malady that has manifested itself in the youth. Right? So it shows on the youth. Right? So if we want to look at the health or the sickness of our community, it's the youth that'll show it. It's in the youth. They're like the mirror that's held up and everyone goes, ooh, this is what's wrong with our community. Right? So likewise, we wouldn't blame the mirror. Right? If you wake up tomorrow morning and you look pale because you haven't slept well, you come down with something, and you look yourself in the mirror, you don't look too good, you don't blame the mirror. Right? I need a new one. Is it wrong? No, there's something wrong with you. Right? It's not the mirror's fault. The mirror is merely a reflection of what's going on. So that's why he goes on to say, who is actually ill when we consider all this, the situation? He says, it is the community that they're living in. This is what we have to get into. So when we consider the situation that the youth are in, if the youth they come across as confused, if the youth come across as ill-mannered, if they come across as disrespectful to their parents, and so on and so forth, it's like, okay, where is this coming from? It's not necessarily coming from them. It's not organic to them. They're being influenced by something around them. So that's why he says, who is actually ill is the community they're living in. Any problem that manifests itself in their behavior in their lives is nothing but an effect of the community's illness. And he's writing this, just to bear in mind, he's writing this book back again, like the 1970s in Syria. And what he's saying is relevant in every time and place, I think, because he's talking about how what's happening in Syria is like, yes, Syria is a Muslim country. The vast majority of the population is Muslim, but you're dealing with influences from outside. You're dealing with people who are influenced by communism, people who are influenced by secularism, people influenced by other religions, and so on and so forth. So he says that, for example, kids might go to school, and they could have like a whole like array of different teachers, teach them different subjects, right? So some of their teachers are going to be Muslims, obviously, but one of their teachers they might have a Shiite teacher, they might have a communist teacher, they might have just a normal secular teacher, they might have an atheist, they have a whole mixture. So what's that going to do to the child? At the end of the day, right? And then they also know, wait, my parents sent me to these people. Huh. Well, make sure my parents telling me, right? You have to bear these things in mind. So he says the youth represent, he said, both these parts of the highlight, they're like a sensor that displays everything that is concealed in the community, right? They reveal everything. They reveal the chaos. They reveal the confusion. They reveal the disorder in the way young people are. So he says, and because young people, because they are the people who are most influenced by the community, right? They're not old enough yet where their brains have developed enough where they can start to criticize. And they can start to say, they actually have critical faculties. And they can say, okay, well, I don't like that, or this is okay, this is good, this is not. They just sort of, until about that young age, they kind of just go with the flow, right? They just, like, by and large, with a few exceptions, they're just going to follow or imitate what's around them. So just go with the community around them, right? So, again, if they seem to be confused or off the mark, or whatever you want to call it, it's going to be because of the community. So that's why he says the young person is the most accurate reflection of the community that is in. If it is good, he's good. If it's bad, he's bad. And whatever manifestations of good or bad we see in this reflection, nothing more than an illustration of the state of the community, whether it is sound or corrupt. So, the question that comes up into that is, okay, well, how come researchers are not aware of this, right? So this is something that, like Imam Bouti, in a lot of his writings, people will say, he'll ask the question himself, because he tries to make it very, very clear. He says, I can't be the first person who realizes this. Right? I can't be the first guy on earth just like to notice something so blatantly obvious. So again, like he does in a lot of his writings, Imam Bouti, he makes it clear that this isn't necessarily an intellectual thing. It's more of an emotional thing. Why people don't do this? So he says, how come these people are aware of it? what he's getting at is the problem that there's people who maybe don't research things or aren't aware of things because, yes, just at an intellectual, mental level, they're not aware of it. They don't notice it, right? But then there's people who don't want to notice it. That's a different issue, right? Because what do you do? What do you do when people are aware of the problem, but then they realize, wait a second, if we follow this problem the way through, the responsibility actually comes back to me. People don't like that, right? So for example, what I really like about myself, this person, is because I've been a teacher for a long time. I've taught in schools, and about 20 years ago or so, I taught. Yeah, I'm old. I taught in a Islamic school. How can I use that generously? I taught in an Islamic school. I won't say where. I don't want to reveal any names, but I taught in an Islamic school, and I remember having this situation where parents would come to the school and they'd complain to the administration or they'd complain to teachers about the way their kids are at home, which I thought was a bit odd. Because, for example, I'll give you a couple examples. One example, there was a boy, his father, he was in my form room, right? So I didn't know, because he's, what I mean about form room, right? So use those terms here. So his father came in and spoke to the head teacher. He didn't speak to me, he spoke to the head teacher and said, my son doesn't pray Fajr. Which I thought, well, we're not with your son at Fajr time, he's with you. But when this news got around to me, now this is back in the day, we had, obviously the register was on a piece of paper. Yeah, remember the stuff, paper? Yeah, and everything was done by pen. And I had all the father's mobile phone numbers. I even had I had all the home phone numbers, and I had all the father's mobile phone numbers on the register. So I just raised this issue. I said, listen, if there's a problem, if some of you are not praying Fajr, your dads are complaining, I'll call you. If you'd like me to, I'll just call all the home numbers. And I'm up at Fajr. I'll just call all your dads and make sure you're awake. Would you like me to do that? No. Well, take responsibility. Take responsibility. Right? It's not our job at a quote-unquote Islamic school to turn your kids into awliya when you do nothing. It's not going to happen. Right? I had the same situation where there's another father who came in, and this is a true story, This is a true story. Okay? There's one time I came into the staff room at lunchtime, and there was a man talking to one of our top secretary, and this man reeked of cigarettes. Well, you could smell it from a well off. Reeked of cigarettes. He had like gold chains. Looked like a gangster from a Bollywood movie. And the secretary looks at me and says, oh, Mahdi, look, this is Mr. So-and-so. He's so-and-so's son. Okay. He's worried about his son's Islamic development. Really? Okay. So what I tried to do, right, to be cordial, and I didn't say anything about his appearance or his smell, didn't say anything. I just said, well, Mr. So-and-so, do you spend any time with your son? Do you hang out with him in the evenings? Do you talk to him? Do you go out with him on weekends? Oh, he did not like that. He just looked at me incredulously like, I work 7 days a week? When am I going to go out with him? When? Okay. I'm going to go have my lunch now. That's what I'll forget. Because what do you do at that point? Right? But the point is that what I'm getting at is what Imam Bouti is saying. It's like researchers don't want to sort of go into the subject because then they have to come to that conclusion that, hey, it's not really the young people's fault. Right? It's our fault, it's our responsibility as a community, right? We're not setting an example. We're not setting an example for young people. We're not teaching young people, and that's why they're like this, and that's why they don't want to go into the issue. Instead, they'd rather sit back and just be like, "This is a mystery. Why are young people like this?" Which is exactly like how that dad was. I don't get it. My son is 15. Why does he smoke? Yeah, mystery. No idea why he smokes. Can't put it together. Why does he wear gold chains? No idea. No idea, don't know why. So, because it says that, that's why these researchers, they do not look at the community, which is where the illness hides and the source of the problem. Okay, so, it's a matter of responsibility and a matter of mission. He says basically the community like an alcoholic in wine. He's aware of its harms, he can see the horrible effects, but he's addicted to it. So he tries to rid his body of it, and uses sedative medicine and so forth, but they don't benefit at all, because he's not getting to the root. You can treat the symptoms as much as you like, but if you don't get to the root of the problem, what can you do, right? I think it was a case, where's Sufi Faisal? Where are you going? No, it's interesting. He asked me a question recently. It was interesting because sometimes people do this. Sometimes people ask a question about a problem, but like the solution is in the problem. He's like, I know this married couple. They have a problem. They're trying to make their marriage work. She's at home with the kids working all day, and he's outside wasting time. What advice would you give? Go home. Like you just said the answer. You just said the problem. Why do you give advice? Right? So people need, it's like, I spent my whole life, I'm on a strict diet of pizzas and donuts, and I'm trying to lose weight. What do you think? You need more sleep. No, some of these things are obvious. It's just a case of admission. Right? So that's why he says here, this is like someone who has spilled sweets all over his body. Right? Like if you imagine you have some sugary substance all over your body, and then flies are all around you, and you're just brushing them away. It's like, well, why do you have flies on you? You got like Coca-Cola all over your shirt or something. That's why. Get to the source of the problem. So he breaks it down. What are these problems we have? So he says we have problems of education and knowledge, psychological problems, and we have social problems. Right? This is how they all come together. Right? So problems of education and knowledge. So he says people want to know. This is the first thing. Young people, they love to know, they want to understand things, they want to put things together. They're always curious, right? I'm sure you all know of a 2-year-old, or not 2-year-old, maybe that's what you know, but 3-year-old, 4-year-old. You remember that old why stage? But why? But why? But why? Right? And then the public school system does a wonderful job of like killing it off. I don't know why. That's not nice. But people have that curiosity. They want to know. So he said, if the community busied itself with this desire of the youth and mobilized all the means of non-information available to search reality and arrive at some knowledge, these youth would become a huge number of scholars would come out of that, right? If the community actually was willing to be honest with kids, again, it goes back to honesty, being honest with the youth, answering all their questions. Because again, this is what kids do, because kids, they're very, very good. They're very, very good at seeing contradictions. They're very, very good at seeing hypocrisy. They can see it. They will say. So if parents tell the child, do this, do that, or this is right, this is wrong, the kids will then look at the parents and see if they're not adding up to that, right? So you can't for example, now I don't know if this is. Does anyone still have a home phone? You guys no one has a landline anymore. Do you still have landlines? Some of you do. Yeah, but to give an example, like when I was growing up, it's not good, for example, if you say to your kids, don't lie. You need to be honest. Always speak the truth. Right? Never lie to anyone. Lying is not good, right? And then one day, the phone rings, and you pick up the phone, and it's someone that your mom or dad does not want to talk to. So you're like, Dad, it's Uncle so-and-so. Yeah, he says he's not here. What was that, Dad? Right? And people think light of it. But the point is, for the kid, that's confusion. For the kid, that's confusion. It's like, wait, you're telling me not to lie, but you're telling me to lie right now to my uncle, or I'm lying to my person at work, right? They see the contradiction, and that causes the confusion. Then you can't ask later, okay, my kid has an honesty problem. Right? Sometimes I've seen situations where sometimes parents, when a child does something wrong, sometimes the case is that the parents get so angry. They get so angry. So for example, just think this is a simple tip, right? If your child does something wrong, and you want to get to the bottom of why he did something wrong, right? So you say, listen, I want you to tell me exactly what happened. And your child tells you the story, right? If this first time, if he's completely honest with you, and he tells you exactly what happened, he tells you an honest story, if you then react as a parent, I get really angry, I throw like a temper tantrum, it's going to produce a mixed message, because the child's going to think, wait a second, I was totally honest, I said what happened, I admitted my guilt, and then you just got really angry, right? Kids don't like it, that's like traumatizes them, if you get really angry, if you throw a temper tantrum. So the kid's going to think, I didn't like that experience, I didn't like being shouted at or yelled at, I didn't like seeing my parents raise their voices or slam fists or slam doors, I didn't like that. So the child will then ingrain himself, like, okay, next time I do something bad, I'll just lie. Next time I do something bad, I'll just lie because I don't want to have that experience anymore. So I'll just make something up. And sometimes I've seen it, and sometimes they do that even when they're older. They'll do it when they're like in their 20s and their 30s. They'll make up stuff. What happened? You see, I was right. So it could be the case where the son was literally joyriding, and that's what caused the crash. But he'll make up a story. No, I was just driving so-and-so, and then this other car came out of nowhere towards me, and I had to swerve out of the way. Yeah, and then they end up in the bush. But they're making it up. Why? Because of the trauma. Because the message they got, the subconscious message they got a long time ago was that if I tell the truth and admit what I did, I just get yelled at. I just get shouted at. All I see is anger. I don't want to, because they don't want to experience that anymore, or again, they'll make up something, right? These are messages that are being put inside children. So, but back to this point about knowledge. So the community has to take advantage of the desire and give people knowledge, and give people honest knowledge, and live up to that knowledge. Right? If we're going to tell our children to be exemplars, to be good, to speak the truth, to be responsible, to be punctual, all these kinds of things, then we need to set that example as well. Right? So that this knowledge that we give to them is not just academic knowledge, it's not just interesting, it's not ooh, phenomenal. No, it has to be knowledge that is actually practical, beneficial to them, and that they can practice. So, what happens is, when we have, as Muslims, obviously, like we have to be very, very clear that our knowledge, obviously, as Muslims, our knowledge is ilm, right? So one of the things that causes confusion is that we don't always make, and this is the point, ilm, right? We don't always make it clear, because we allow our children, especially if they go into the public school system, is they get beguiled and confused by all the terms that get used, So, for example, we don't have in Arabic, this is why the importance of the Arabic language, everyone, the importance of the Arabic language is in Arabic, we don't make a distinction between like knowledge and science and so forth. We have, knowledge is one thing, it's ilm, right? And ilm is, as they say this, there's different ways of wording, but إدراك الشيء كما هو في الواقع, or إدراك الشيء كما هو على حقيقته, meaning that you understand something as it truly is. That's what knowledge is. That's what science is. It's the same thing. It's understanding something as it truly is. So for example, if we all went outside and we looked at a giant oak tree outside, and we said, okay, let's guess the height of this tree. We could all agree. We could all agree. Everyone in this room could agree and say, yeah, it's 15 feet or 20 feet tall. Let's say we all agree it's 20 feet tall. Okay, just by looking at it, we could create a consensus. We get everyone in the street to agree with us. 20 feet, 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 20 feet. All it takes is one person with some super long measuring tape or whatever measuring device, maybe an app, just to measure it. And say, oh, actually it's 21 and a half. What happens to the consensus? It's useless now, because we measured it, right? That's what ilm is, right? But one of the things they do in the school systems here is they don't distinguish. And I have another book by Bouti coming out very soon called al-Hiwar fi Kitabillah, the Etiquette of Dialogue in Allah's book. It's a short book, and it's going to include the Arabic text as well, for people to improve their Arabic skills and translation skills. But the point I'm getting at, and what he gets out of that book as well, is that what they don't do in the school systems and in the society is they don't distinguish between science, actually something that is demonstrable and measured and proven, and then scientific research. something that's still being researched and has not been proven or established, right? They muddy the water. It's science. Shut up, listen. Shut up, away. It's science. It's science. Okay, it's not proven though. It's simply in the field of research. It's still being theorized. And this one is very, very important. And that's why he says here, he says, ilm, this word ilm can never apply to two different understandings of one reality. Right? We're talking, like, either one is true or not. It can't be the case that the tree is 21.5 feet tall, and that's ilm, and the tree is 20 feet tall, and that's ilm. No. Only one can be science, only one can be knowledge, and the other, anything else is nonsense. Anything else is fake. Okay? So, this is another problem people have. So, this is why he puts us in here, the science versus scientific research. So, we have to understand, we have to make sure that people understand, we have to make sure our kids, our youth understand this, that when you're looking at the whole world, you have to make that distinction between there's scientific laws, there's things that have been proven and established, and then there are things that are simply being researched, right? They're theorized, right? It's important. They're just being theorized. They have not been proven. And that's again the same time why we as Muslims, we don't like to jump on. Our starting point is always going to be the Quranic text, so we don't like to jump on the latest scientific theory, right? That's a mistake people make, because people say, oh, this was in the Quran 400 years ago, right? As soon as a new theory comes out. Because sooner or later that theory will get debunked. But, well, that's what the Quran was talking about. This doesn't look good, does it? Right? The most we should say is, well, that might be what Allah is referring to in ayah such and such. Might be. But we don't jump onto it because, again, these people are involved, a large part of the time, they're involved merely in research. They're not actually dealing with things that have been proven and established and can be clearly demonstrated. Okay. So, and then he goes on to give examples, right? And this is what they do in the West, right? They do this in the West. For example, they'll try to tell you, this is why he gives you all these names, like Kant, Descartes, Freud, Karl Marx, Darwin, Sturmill, and they'll say, okay, all these people are scientists. They're scientists, right? And what they produce is science, right? But then the young person reads their books and realizes, wait a second, these guys don't agree with each other. How can they all be scientists? How can they all be espousing science when they contradict one another? They don't agree with each other. Lamarck doesn't agree with Darwin. Descartes doesn't agree with Freud. What's going on? Right? So that's why it says here, Descartes and Kant do not believe in Darwin's theory of evolution. Darwin does not agree with Freud, what Freud says about sexual intercourse. Those among them who view that the structure of the universe is based on the law of mechanics do not believe, as Marx do, that it's a dialectical structure, and blah, blah, blah. Right? They have all these. So how can these all be scientists? Right? This is what leads to the confusion. So people are going to school and they're learning all this stuff. This is one of the things that we have to be aware of with our children, is because this is a very secular thing. A very secular thing is that we don't want to fall into this this dichotomy of religion versus science. Right? This is a huge thing that pull out, because that's the secular mind. The secular mindset is that religion is over here, science is over here. They're two mutually exclusive categories, and therefore it's like religion is like, that's Maulana Sahib territory, and that's it, we don't go into that. And then science is for the guy, well, science is basically for the kafir. Right? That's a lot of mistakes Muslims make. Right? They fall into that mindset, right? And they don't see where they meet. They don't see the connection. But no, the point is that what we learn, what Allah has taught us, what Allah has taught is the source of ilm. And we use that to judge everything else. So you can take a simple ayah from, like, take Surah Al-Hujurat, the 49th chapter, verse 6, where Allah says, إِذَا جَاءَكُمْ فَاسِقٌ بِنَبَإٍ فَتَبَيَّنُوا. Right? If a corrupt, untrustworthy person comes to you with information, check it. That ayah is not just applying to hadith sciences. That's not just applying to, like, who you get your knowledge from, in terms of, like, who study fiqh with or whatever like that. That's a general principle. It's a general principle. Like, wherever you get information from, check it. Right? So if you practice that ayah, that would automatically dismiss, like, the corporate media, because they have a history of lying about everything. That would dismiss 99.9% of politicians, right? You know they're lying because their lips are moving, right? So why would you listen to them, right? Like, their fisk has been established, right? So these are basic principles that have been given to us, that we don't just believe everything that we're told. right? We have standards that we judge things by. But what he says is, but when a child, when a young person growing up, when he is exposed to all these contradictions, so he's hearing different things from his parents, different things from these so-called scientists, and then what the scientists say don't agree with what he might hear from other, and so on and so forth. What it leads to is it leads to just contempt for everything, right? Because it's like no one's being straight with me, no one's just telling me the truth. I'm just hearing different things from different people, and that creates this contempt and this sort of cynicism that a lot of young people have, right? Which I would say, like, in cynicism is a big thing of English culture anyway. Which I would say, I wouldn't say this to an American audience, but I definitely say this to an English audience. You have to protect your kids from this, right? I was just noticing the other day. I was teaching Arabic yesterday to one of my students here, and then she asked me. She said because we were talking about, because we were reading about the weather, and we said so how would you describe the weather? She said, well, how would I say gloomy in Arabic? I said, well, okay, gloomy, look it up. Well, gloomy, now maybe like ka'ib, like hazeen, like depressing, sad, right? But the thing is, the Arabs never say that. Like, Arabs never describe the weather in those subjective, miserable terms, right? They'll just say, it's dark, it's cloudy, overcast. But it's the English who, it's gloomy, it's miserable, it's depressing, right? There's a lot of ingratitude just in the way they speak, right? Which we have to protect ourselves from, right? I mean, seriously, let me ask all of you, because you work with people who aren't Muslim, right? When you ask your colleagues at work, or when you ask them, like, how are you, what do they say to you?
Not bad.
Exactly. Not too bad. Seen better days. Right? It's just there's so much ingratitude in what they say. Right? Could be better. Right? Whereas we're taught to say Alhamdulillah. Right? We're taught to thank Allah. We're taught to be grateful for what we have. Right? And it's the same with the weather. Like, you never see Arabs, Arabs, they will never ever complain about the weather. Right? They'll use objective terms. Okay, they might say like, oh yeah, it's very hot. Oh, it's very cold. But not going to say like, oh, this weather's terrible. It's miserable. Right? These horrible terms that the English people use. Because it's just a lot of things. And remember, what does Allah call ingratitude in the Quran? Allah calls it kufr. It's kufr. Right? Allah says, right? Remember me and I'll remember you. It's Baqarah by 151. Remember me and I'll remember you. And be grateful to me. And don't commit kufr. Right? So there's something to be said about that. Like we don't want to have that cynicism. You have to be careful, right? Because the English people, they just imbibe that. Right? Which is different. It's weird. It's different from the Americans. The Americans have a more positive attitude. There's like a joke theory about that. It's like America's populated by the English people who actually were optimistic. Let's try it. Let's cross the ocean, see what happens. Right? And then all the English people that are still here, they're the descendants of the people 200 years ago said, no, I'm not bothered. We're dealing with the descendants of those people. Right? They're not interested. So, the next thing that Imam Bouti talks about is also knowledge and culture, right? So it's very, very important just to be clear about this. This is just make sure we have a distinction between what we understand as ilm, because he says basically ilm is what is objectively true, right? Like we said, like the tree outside 21 feet up. That's objectively true, right? There's no argument. Whereas thaqafa is a mixture of things. Thaqafa can be some things that are objectively true, but thaqafa can also things that are just that are subjective, right? There are things in the culture that people prefer to do in one culture compared to another culture, and they're not universal truths, right? They're just things that people prefer to culture. So he said that's another thing that we have to make sure our kids understand. They understand the difference between ilm and thaqafa. They understand the difference between culture, and they understand the difference between like what we understand as knowledge. And again, that's another problem. We have to make sure that the kids, they understand cultural aspects, and they distinguish between cultural aspects and deen. Right? This doesn't mean that all culture is bad. It just means we have to make sure that we don't mix the two and impose something cultural to people on our youth. Say, yeah, this is from the deen. Why not? These are cultural things. Right? We have to be aware of this. Then we have the psychological struggle. So again, what he's talking about here in this section is talks about the duplexity and contradiction. How again, I mentioned this before, I've kind of alluded to this, how all these contradictions and duplexity, i.e. where people where children are told like two ideas at the same time that don't match, this will lead to mixed messages, right? This mixed message, this will lead to confusion in the child. So for example, this is an example of mixed message. So he says, a child can go to universities or schools, or again, like in our case out here in some of the UK, like going to the masjid and so forth. So we hear about the religion, Islam, its facts, its values, the need to establish a community based on its pillars, and also how to use the deen to treat problems. But at the same time, you hear about reactionism. Like you don't want to be old-fashioned backward. Get with the times, progress, right? And he'll hear about the so-called scientific renaissance and how religion is backward and outdated, and people need to be liberated from the prison of religion. All this stuff. So it's a mixed message. It's a mixed message that this has to be addressed, because again, how are we again? If you fall into that, if we allow our kids to fall into that trap of religion's over here and science is over here, quote unquote, that's going to create just a complete sort of split personality. Which one do I follow, right? Or am I supposed to be religious like for these hours of the day, and then I'm Mr. Scientific Secular these hours of the day, right? These are the psychological problems that this can cause. And again, and he says this doesn't just lead to confusion amongst family members or the youth, but it's going to be visible in the family, right? So you're going to have, that's why I said in this bottom paragraph, you're going to have family members who disagree with each other, right? You're going to have husbands and wives arguing, and then they argue in front of their kids, and that makes the kids more confused. It's like, what am I actually following? What am I actually doing? Is dad right? Is mom right? Are we being too Islamic? Are we being not enough? Like, what's going on? Right? So it's, again, it's very, very important for parents to be grounded to know what they're doing and how to raise their children. And then again, something that I mentioned before, is that the problem of hypocrisy. So a child, young people will see speakers, preachers, other people, guides, and this can include parents. But he finds that these people, what they do, there are other motives and interests, right? People have worldly motives and agendas behind what they do. And that's also going to affect them, right? One of the things I put in my book, The Big Steps, several years ago, is I said that when it comes to attaching yourself or learning from ulama, something one of my teachers taught me is the basic principle of we judge the living by the dead. We judge the living by the dead. And what that means is that any living scholar, he has to be compared to the scholars that have gone before. He has to be held to that standard, right? Because the scholars who have gone before, it's like their case is closed, right? And we know everything we know about them, and we know that they are sound and trustworthy, right? So if you take like one name from history, you take like Imam Nawawi, because everyone knows Imam Nawawi is. We know everything we know about him. He's reliable, he's sound, he's trustworthy, right? So we look at other ulama afterwards. We say, okay, does this current scholar, does he match up to him? Does he match up to Imam Nawawi? Does he match up to Imam Ghazali? Does he match up to these? Okay, well that's good. If he deviates from that, then it's like that's a standard we can't take, right? So I think in my book I use the example of I use the analogy of like investment, right? It's like the ulama that have gone before. Again, all four madhabs, right? The ulama that have gone before, they're like gold, right? They're gold because they stood the test of time. And we trust them when they're reliable. Whereas anyone alive today, he's like a paper currency. He can be good, he can be bad. But he's not gold. When he dies, he can become gold, maybe. Right? And again, gold is gold that backs up a paper currency, isn't it? Right? But that's an okay analogy. It works. Right? So that's what people need to be held, and that's why it's kind of a scary thing when some people they invest, this is true, they invest their faith, they might invest their faith in like a living person or in a living organization. And then when that living organization or that living person lets them down, they can leave Islam. You see. Because they're like, well, I thought this person was the flag bearer of Medina, but This person let me down. So it's like, no, you make sure that your faith, your iman is invested in the gold. The gold won't let you down. The gold won't let you down, right? Don't invest in the dollar or the euro or the rupee, right? That's not trustworthy long term, right? You can go up and down. So, again, what's the outcome? This person will be just, again, because the person is a mass of mind and soul and emotions. The outcome will be is that this person will have like a sort of a psychological struggle, and then he doesn't know who to trust. He doesn't know who to trust, right? We don't want our children to get in that regard where they're cynical, and that's what you see. Like again, if you look at the general English population, that's what you find with them. They're super cynical people, right? It's like they know. It's like they know that their politicians lied to them. They know that the media lies to them. They know this stuff. And they're like, well, what can we do? And so they're like cynical and they're apathetic. Right? Yeah, I'll vote. Yeah, I'll just get the same thing over again. Yeah, right? So we don't want to fall into that. We certainly don't want to, because we fall into that. That's what we'll teach our kids. Right? We want to make sure that they have a clear structure of what they're learning, why things are the way they are. And we want our kids, especially like we want our kids, especially as parents and mothers and fathers, we want our kids to sort of see us as like that beacon. You want to be that lighthouse for your child, where your child can say, okay, there's so much confusion around me, but I know that if I go to mom and dad, they'll answer my question. Right? If I ask my mom and my dad, they'll give me a clear answer, and I'll know what to do. Right? Whereas if we as parents, if we allow ourselves to fall into contradictions and get confused, or if we do things that if we say things that we do not do, or vice versa, this can break our children's hearts, right? And they lose respect, and they lose respect for us. It's really hard to get it back. Because they're like, and one of the things that's really scary about this, just to give you like a chronic example, one of the things that's really scary about this is there's an Arabic word, maqt. In the law used in the Quran, maqt, right? Now, maqt, mean qafta, is a word that Allah only uses in a few circumstances. And it means like an intense form of hatred. It's not just hatred, but it's an intense form of hatred, right? So one example that Allah gives, I think it's in Surah Nisa, ayah 21, where Allah talks about, he says, he said, don't marry what your fathers have married. Right? And this was a practice that used to happen in Jahiliyyah. But this idea of a father dying and then the son marries the stepmother. Right? And even the Arabs found that disgusting. Even the Jahili Arabs, they found that disgusting. Right? And that's why Allah describes it as like maqt and a fahisha and sa'asabila. Like Allah gives it three things. Right? When Allah in the Quran, when Allah tells you don't do something, that should be sufficient. But then it goes and Allah calls it a maqt and a fahisha and a sabila. It's like, this is a really, really, really bad thing to do, right? And the Arabs themselves, the Jahili Arabs, they would call the guy who did that a maqti, right? Because they found it so disgusting. It's like you're marrying your mother. Ew, it's gross. But Allah uses it there, maqt. Allah also uses it in Surah Al-Ghafir, in ayah 10, it's a beautiful ayah. And Allah talks about it. Now this ayah is interesting because Allah is talking about Yawm al-Qiyamah, and He's talking about the unbelievers, and He's saying that the unbelievers on that day, they will hate themselves. Right? Now, think of that. So the unbelievers on Yawm al-Qiyamah, just ask yourself this question, picture, when they realize that everything they did in this life was a waste of time, and now they're lost for all eternity, they're going to have maqt for themselves. They're going to have this severe hatred of themselves, right? And that's why Allah says, "Inna alladhina kafaru yunadun." Those who disbelieved are going to be called, and the angels will say to them, "La maqtallahi akbaru min maqtikum anfusakum in tad'una liman takfurun." It says, like Allah's going to say, like your maqt of yourselves on this day is not as great as Allah's maqt of the fact that you were called to faith and you rejected it. That's why Allah uses that ayah is a beautiful proof that Allah doesn't want to send anyone to the fire, but He keeps His promise. Right? Allah hates the fact, Allah has mucked the fact that you're called to faith, you rejected it. And then they have mucked it themselves. Right? So this is a very strong word, mucked. It's not like your usual baghat or kiraha. It's a strong word. And there's one more time where it comes up, mucked. And that's in Surah Al-Saf, in the 61st chapter. I think it's verse 2. Allah says, كَبَرُوا مَقْتًا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَن تَقُولُوا مَا لَا تَفْعَلُونَ. Yeah, and it's a huge maqt with Allah that you say what you do not do. Right? That's what Allah uses maqt. It's a serious thing. It's a serious thing to say what you do not do. Right? To preach what you don't practice, or to practice what you don't preach. Right? And this really, really affects children. So, and that's why I said the result is that these young people, they just don't believe anything. They don't have certainty of anything, and it's just cynicism, and it's cynicism, and then it's apathetic. Okay, and then the psychological cause, and then what happens after that? What happens after that's what he talks about these pages. What happens after that is then they realize, okay, well, since there is no, because once they get to that point, when they realize, okay, there is no truth, there is no falsehood, right? It's all just a mess, and everyone's just lying to me. Then what do? They just fall into their desires. That's all that's left. That's all that's left. Because it's a very depressing thought. It's a very depressing thought when you realize, if you come to that conclusion, that horrible conclusion, that there is no truth, and there's no meaning to life, then that's what's left. And then again, look at the wider society. Why do you think these people drink all the time? These people can't go like a few hours without a beer. They're running away from that fact. Right? Because they realize that's all there is to life. There's no truth, there's no falsehood, there's no, what do I do? There's no right, there's no wrong, whatever. And they just live cynical, meaningless lives. And then the last thing, obviously, is the social problems. And this is again where this person will find, what he talks about here, I don't want to keep this too long, is what he talks about here in this section, is he talks about how young people are going to face contradictions on the streets, in public facilities and institutions, and then they also will find problems at home, right? So again, outside it's the temptations, it's the fact that they're exposed to so many things that they're not supposed to be exposed to. You have nudity, and then obviously, like Bouti writing this in the 1970s, then there's worse things now. People pushing the transgender agenda and all kinds of horrible things that kids are exposed to. So just a few days ago, I think my poor wife, she thought CBeebies was still innocent. She thought CBeebies was still innocent. She said, okay, I'll let my little daughter watch CBeebies. A few minutes later, my little daughter was crying because she seen just one of these celebrity homosexuals was on there. And just the way he looks is scary. My daughter started crying, right? So people get exposed to they shouldn't be exposed to. And then the other thing we have here is hostility, because what happens is obviously that if a child is somehow manages by Allah's grace, the child manages to make sense of things, to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to be a Muslim. I believe Islam is the truth, and therefore I'm going to stick to Muslims. Is that sometimes that child will make that decision, but then he will face hostility because he's done that. He will face hostility for his choice from his own family, right? He'll get it from outside, obviously, from people, but he might get it from his own family. And so think, oh, he's being a bit too religious. Oh, he's being a bit extreme, right? But that child is just trying to be the best Muslim that he can, right? And obviously, we don't want him to fall away into some deviant cult or fall into innovation, but we want that child to be nurtured on the right path. So if you're in a situation, we don't want to be parents, we're in a situation where we have a son or a daughter who's trying to be really hard to be a committed believer, and we're in the way, right? Or we don't encourage it, right? Or we don't try to match it and say, like, you know what, my child's actually setting a good example. Why don't I try to match that, right? That's why he says here. And he says we actually have parents who get in the way. He says it's not some colonialist epidemic or some Zionist mischief. It's parents. It's so-called Muslim parents who are doing this to their kids, right? They get in the way of their kids' enthusiasm to be devoted Muslims. So what is the treatment? So the treatment has to be to everyone, right? It's not just to the youth, it has to be to everyone, right? Because of the community that's not the youth. And he says that those who are suffering from these problems do not possess any practical means to solve it. So it's not for, we can't tell the youth to solve these problems. It's not for them to solve, right? It's the community around them, right? So we have to be doing everything in our power to help the youth, to facilitate for the youth, and to guide them, and to give them certainty and clarity. So the first step one is, like what he says here, is the community has to be sincere. Like we have to admit that we're responsible for this. We have to admit to ourselves and say that our youth are the way they are because we've made certain mistakes along the way. We're not practicing what we preach. We're exposing them to seeing the things they should be exposed to. We're letting them receive mixed messages, whether it's from school, whether it's from the wider media, whether it's from the culture, whatever it is. We're responsible for this, and therefore we have to make sure that we are in control of these things and that we are giving them the right values and principles. And then that's what they understand, and then they know that, okay, this is true, this is false, this is why I'm alive, this is my purpose, this is halal, this is all. They have to know these things. So a young person's ears should not hear two contradictory discussions, right? They need to be told the straight truth. Now, what can the youth do? Now, the youth, obviously, you're not powerless or helpless, but here's the interesting thing. Here's the interesting thing, right? And this is a very, very important message for young people, is be responsible. So on the one hand, yeah, if you've had a hard childhood and you've received lots of mixed messages, yes, it's not your fault. What happened to you as a child? That's not your fault, right? How can it be your fault, right? Whatever schools you went to, the teachers you had, and the bullies you had to deal with, whatever your parents did, that's not your fault. But as an adult, you are responsible. As an adult, you're responsible. You can't blame your childhood forever, right? Like I gave that pizza and donuts example recently. Okay, if your parents raised you on pizzas and donuts and made you obese, okay, that's not your fault. But you're an adult now. You can control your diet, right? You can't just, that's just pizzas and donuts, that's what they gave me. Like, okay, that's done now, right? You can now go buy celery, right? You can get yourself on a healthy diet, right? So take responsibility. Don't just blame your childhood forever, right? Some people don't break out of that kind of funk. They keep blaming their child. It's okay, yeah, but that's over now, right? You're an adult now. You take charge. So he says here the treatment of resistance and resilience. So he's advising young people here is that yes, maybe in certain cases you'll have to rise above the community. And what he talks about here in these sections, because I don't want to take too much time, is he talks about the importance of finding true teachers, but also the importance of building community. So if you're a young person and you're surrounded by people who don't help you, try to have good company, try to have good friends, and build from there, and be there to advise one another and help one another. And the psychological problem, again, in these cases, he says the young person can do nothing but seek refuge in one of the lifeboats. Again, through the help of other people in their community, other good brothers and sisters who have the same, who are like-minded. They will support and help you. And another thing as well that comes up here is for young people, this is advice for everyone, is you never, ever underestimate the power of dua. Right? Whatever situation you're in, right? The Prophet ﷺ said that dua silahul mu'min, right? That the dua is the weapon of the believer. Right? So whatever situation you're in, you say like, well, what can I do? Right? You have dua, and then on top of that also there are special du'as that you can make. There's du'as like Salatul Hajjah, for example, which you should all know. It's in the Adhkar Imam Nawawi, it's in the Wasiyah Imam Matin Qudama, the Sunnah collections. These are powerful, right? And whatever struggle you're in, again, like I said, I think I talked about depression, anxiety with you before, is that you want to see every trial and tribulation as a way of Allah bringing you closer to Him. So take advantage of it. And if you are a young person, and you feel like, okay, I'm in a situation where I'm trying to get closer to Allah, I'm trying to build a relationship with Allah, but everything is against me, and people are not supporting me, or people are trying to trip me up and trying to make me stumble, then you have to sort of see it from a different perspective and say, well, Allah's chosen you out of all of this, right? Out of this huge mess here, Allah's chosen you. Right? And you never, this is one of the amazing things, like in the Quran, there's so many amazing stories like this in the Quran, like where the way Allah talks in the Quran is where something can look like really bad, but it's actually really good. Like there's a way Allah does in the Quran. Like for example, like Surah Al-Fath, the 48th chapter, right? Like that surah is revealed after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, right? So after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, so all the companions went, or a large group of companions, they went in the Messenger of Allah to Mecca in the hope, and this is also before the Fath, and they're hoping to perform Umrah, and then they meet the Quraysh outside Mecca at Hudaybiyah, then they make a treaty, and they agree to certain things, and then they don't do Umrah. They have to head back to Medina now. And the companions are crestfallen, right? They really thought they would do the Umrah. But that's when Allah reveals Surah Al-Fath. Inna fatahna laka fathan mubina. We have given you a clear victory. How? Right? And they fail. They don't realize that after that there's no more fighting. And Mecca's taken over not long after. There's no more fighting after that. Urwa bin Mas'ud al-Thaqafi, he's a major companion. And he's very handsome. He's from Taif. And the Master of Allah said that he looked like Isa. Right? Urwa bin Mas'ud al-Thaqafi. He became Muslim after this as well. But he was part of the negotiating party for the Quraysh. And he had been an ambassador for the Quraysh. So he'd gone to Rome, he'd been to Persia, he'd been to Abyssinia. He'd seen the major like kings and emperors of his time. He'd seen them, and he'd seen their followers and what they were like. And what he saw on the day of Hudaybiyah, when he saw the companions' love for the Messenger of Allah and how they respected him, how they obeyed him, and how they followed him, he saw that. He just witnessed that because I haven't come across much of him saying anything that day, but he just observed it. He went back to the Quraysh and said, "Just stop fighting him. Don't fight this man anymore. Don't fight the Messenger of Allah. Don't fight him anymore, because it's a lost cause." Because it said the way his companions are devoted to him, no one else has that. None of these kings or these emperors, none of them have this devotion. Right? The people around him, the people around these kings and emperors, it's fear, it's some sort of personal interest. But like these companions, they genuinely love him. They genuinely love him and follow him. And there's lots of them. You see, so it's a losing cause, and that's what affects it. Another beautiful example of this is if you read the story of Musa alayhi salam. You read the story of Musa alayhi salam in Surah Al-Taha. About 3 pages in, I think it's ayah 39, right? Where, again, we're talking about a young person being alone, aren't we? Right? We're talking about a young person being alone against all the odds, right? So the story of Musa alayhi salam is that his mother takes him. His mother takes him, right? We have some mothers here, but think about this, right? His mother takes him and puts him in a tabut, it's like a box, and just puts him into the open sea, right? Because she knows, right? Because she knows that Fir'aun is going around killing all these newborn babies, right? Because he's received some dream, whatever it was, that someone's going to take over his throne. So she puts Musa alayhi salam in his tabut and just watches him drift off into the sea, right? And that's why in Surah Al-Qasas she says like wasbat fuad Musa fariqa, like fuad Musa fariqa, like her heart became like empty when she did this, right? She puts him in the tabut and his baby just floats away. And then the next ayah, Allah says that he ends up with the last person they want to end up with. He ends up with Fir'aun, right? And Allah says he ends up with aduwwan li wa aduwwan lahu. He ends up with an enemy of mine and an enemy of his. That's what he describes. That's exactly where Fir'aun ends up, right? So you're reading the story to that point, and you're like, SubhanAllah, this is terrible. Like, what's happened? Musa alayhi salam, he's been put in this box. He's drifted off the sea. His mother's left him. His mother. And he's there. Now he's actually with Fir'aun. Allah's calling like he's my enemy, he's Musa's enemy. He's like, but then right after that, Allah says something amazing. Right after that, Allah says to Musa, he says, Alqaytu alayka mahabbatan minni. I showered you with my love. And right at that moment, I showered you with my love. And the Mufassirun about this ayah, they say that what this means is that with Musa alayhi salam, it's like everyone who saw him loved him. Even Fir'aun loved him. Right? So at that situation, when you think it looks really bad, looks really terrible, it's like Allah just turns it around. He says, no, I showered you by love in that moment, right? And then you grew up, and look what became of you, right? Then you became Musa and Isa, right? And you challenged Fir'aun, you led your people out, and so forth, right? So it's that you never ever think of, again, that's an example. You can look bad on the surface, but then Allah turns it around. Allah turns it around. You can see in the beauty of it. So the other thing he talks about here, again, the benefits of the small community. Again, like this is the good thing about company for young people. That if they're righteous and they're knowledgeable, they'll help one another. So again, we treat social problems. This is the last thing. Again, we deal with the temptation, treat the marketplace. Again, protecting our children, and of course, the contradictions in the home. And he does the last thing here. He just addresses the parents. Really, he just addresses the parents and says that for families, like you need to be good to your kids, right? Be good to your kids, and support them if they're being enthusiastic about their religion. Don't stand in the way, because he actually deals with cases where you've got young people. It's funny. You've got young people who are like praying tahajjud, and then their parents complain about it. You're making noise at night. So he says to these young parents, he says, you don't understand what a good deal you've got. You could spend the rest of your life sinning like you are, and then that child will actually do shifa for you on Yom Qiyamah. Like, are you stupid? Like, what's wrong with you? Like, you're complaining about this child's righteousness. This child will probably save you in the next life, right? But inshallah, none of us are like that. But that's the point he's getting to, is that we want to have this this mercy, and we want to be assisting our children when they're trying to be righteous, when they want to be religious. We want to encourage them, and we don't want to stand in their way as far as possible. وَلِلَّهِ الْحَمْدُ. So, alhamdulillah.